Okay. So, Salamat Pagi. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm Abhas, as I was introduced. I'm the practice manager for urban development and disaster risk management for the World Bank. I'm based in Singapore, and I look after the countries of East Asia and the Pacific. So I'm going to talk about the global experience in affordable housing provision. And you might be wondering about the title. We said, have we learned nothing and have we forgotten nothing? And let me try and explain what I mean by that. Yeah. So this quote comes from Talleyrand, who was the French foreign minister in the 19th century. And this quote is about the House of Bourbons. And he said essentially that they learned nothing from history and they forgot nothing. And what that means is that you make the same mistakes again and again and again. And I work on urban development and affordable housing throughout, I've worked in almost every region of the world. And we find the same mistakes being made in this area also. And let me try and elaborate a little bit on what I mean by that. So I want to begin, first of all, by thanking Chang for this kind invitation and also paying a tribute to all that you've achieved in the 30 years of your existence. Chang, I think, has played a significant role in the development of Malaysia's housing finance market, the secondary mortgage market, and the sustainable provision of affordable housing at a time when Malaysia was rapidly urbanizing. And so the demand for housing was acute. So congratulations and happy birthday to Chagamas. So going back to the topic that we're here to discuss. Oops. So I want to start with three. There you go. I want to start with three key messages. So first of all, I don't think I need to tell anyone here that housing is critically important. It's an important driver of economic growth. It's an important factor in reducing inequality in societies and poverty reduction. So that's number one. But the second and more worrying message is that there's a crisis in affordable housing and social housing provision throughout the world. And it's not just the developing world. And you see the mistakes that I'm going to talk about being repeated. And then finally, what does good policy in this area mean? It means a very energetic and effective regulation of the market. It means participation by the private sector in an effective way. And it needs well-functioning private markets. And I'll give you some examples of that. I think I can go quickly over this. I think everyone knows here that housing is critically important. 74% of people live in low-income countries, less than $2 a day. There's about 1 billion people live in slums globally. There's a growing middle class, as you're well aware here in Malaysia. And housing needs, it's interesting that it's calculated that there are about 100,000 units needed per day just to keep pace with growing incomes and growing populations. So it's a critically important sector. Those give you the biggest housing markets by value. So Mexico is India, Brazil. So let's talk about the crisis. Does anyone know what this is? Yes. So it's June 14th, Grenfell Towers in London. And this is in a part of London called Kensington. And I found it interesting to know that in 1851, Charles Dickens wrote about Kensington. And he talked about the extreme concentration of wealth and poverty in the same neighborhood, which you see even today. Has anyone seen the film Notting Hill, starring Hugh Grant? Notting Hill is a very fancy neighborhood of London, and it's very close to this tower. 80 people died in this. Some people are still missing. So it's a horrible tragedy. But the point I'm trying to make is that this crisis of affordable housing is not limited to developing countries. You see that happening in UK. You certainly see it in the US. So there is a really big problem. And the pockets of poverty and extreme wealth living side by side is one of the biggest drivers of this problem. This is Metro Manila. So you have a lot of poor people living in very unsanitary, very unsafe parts of the city. So coming to the mistakes. So if you try to break it down, so the first part is on the housing supply. So the one key message I want to leave here is about the land. Land is critical for housing, and often that is a big constraint in the sustainable provision of affordable housing. Then on the finance side, you see really badly targeted subsidies. So often governments try to target the demand side, the supply side, by, say, for example, giving interest rate subsidies, which do not work as well as the demand side subsidies. And then finally, the enabling environment. The Deputy Governor talked about that. You need really robust regulation. You need good planning. You need good zoning. You need transparent and efficiently functioning land markets. And you need all these three parts, the housing part, the supply part, the demand part, and the regulation part, to be working in tandem. So in 1993, there was a famous paper by a World Bank economist called Steve Mayo. You can Google it and you'll find it very easily. And it was called Enabling Housing Markets to Work. And essentially it said you have three instruments to stimulate the demand side, you have three to facilitate the supply side, and then you need one institutional framework. And I'll talk about that in the next slide. So on the finance side, you need to develop the finance markets, the mortgage finance markets. You need to properly target your subsidies. And you need to have enforceable property rights. So things like foreclosure regime. So that's on the finance. On the supply side, you need to promote infrastructure development. You need to regulate the land and housing development. And then you need to have a robust building industry. The construction industry needs to be supported. And then finally, you need the institutional side. You need a robust M&E system. Again, the Deputy Governor talked about databases and data, good data. So that essentially is what you need for a fully functioning housing market. Now, if you look at, for example, Singapore, one of the key lessons that comes out from this Singapore experience is cross-subsidization. So essentially, they use the top part of the market to cross-subsidize the bottom part. So, and across the world, I think that is one of the key lessons, that cross-subsidization is one of the key elements. The second is the access to cheap land. When Singapore was rapidly expanding affordable housing, they used eminent domain quite a lot in acquiring land. And that is, again, one of the bottlenecks in many countries that we see, the access to land. Location matters a lot. We were talking about housing affordability, that Malaysia is facing a problem in rapidly expanding prices. But what we found is that you have to look at housing and transport together. So you can have a perfectly fine house, which is far out. This is Indonesia, but this is not to pick on Indonesia. Every country faces the same problem, that they build houses way out far from where people work, and it's unaffordable when you put the housing and transport together. So now in the US, many cities now have what they call the housing plus transport index, where they calculate the housing cost and the transport cost together. So I think that's a key message. And then neighborhoods. You need to carefully design neighborhoods in a way that you avoid the kind of extreme poverty segregation that you saw in Grenfell Towers in London or the banlieues in Paris. So I think if there's one message I want to leave with you today, this is the key one, that you need to design neighborhoods in which all incomes are living together. They have access to quality infrastructure like transport, and they have access to quality schools and hospitals. If you create poverty ghettos, then it's just not going to work. So this is an example from India where they've used, so they've kind of avoided the interest rate subsidies and used subsidies to push private developers down market. And we can talk about that in the question and answer if you have more questions. So India has seen a lot of activity in the past about 10 years where private developers are going more and more down market. So that I think is quite innovative in that sense. And the Reserve Bank of India, which is like BNM, the Central Bank of India, has played a very good role in terms of providing liquidity and refinancing to housing finance. And then, of course, the subprime market. You've heard about the meltdown, the 2008 crisis, which was precipitated by the US subprime market. But essentially what you saw was a failure of regulation. So Standard & Poor, this is a true story. Standard & Poor, when they did their calculation of mortgage rate, when they modeled the risk of mortgage rates, they didn't have any provision for negative rate. So they never assumed that housing prices could fall in their model, which is kind of crazy when you look at it now. So that quote is from the movie Big Short, which says, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." So, oops. So again, just to recap, I want to leave you with 3 key messages. So the first is neighborhoods matter a lot. You need to design neighborhoods where the poor, the rich, and the middle class can live together. You avoid the segregation of poverty. The second is you need to manage land very intelligently. And there are interesting models. I can talk about it in the question and answer. Copenhagen has set up a public and private partnership which manages all the land in the city strategically. And they hire commercial managers to do that. And there are other models like that. But land is crucial in how you do it. And then finally, I think rental markets are very important. The Deputy Governor talked about the importance of home ownership, and I think it is important. But at the same time, I think we have neglected rental markets quite a lot. And if you look at it, especially for the poor, they're often a crucial factor in the provision of affordable housing. And if you look at countries like Germany or Holland, the rates of home ownership are not that high. Most people prefer to rent. So that is also something that we need to look at. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, salam negaraku Malaysia. Terima kasih Mr. Chairman, Mr. Sheikh, Deputy Governor Bank Negara yang bahagia, Tan Sri dan Datuk, tuan-tuan dan puan-puan. I was told by Mr. Moderator that we are given about 10 minutes each, but this morning we have made a gentleman agreement that half of my time is given to Mr. Chang. So he speak longer this morning than me. Okay. My name is Abdul Rahim. So being the custodian or head of the National Housing Department, I will touch on the simple matters. It's about the factors contribute to house prices, and then a few initiatives done under the ministry, and then finally I'll probably touch on an issue which is very much fond of to Mr. Chang. It's the abandoned project. Okay. These factors contribute to house prices. It's quite common to all actually. If I will go just straightforward. It's about the land cost, the labor cost, building material, imbalance in demand and supply, and speculators. So this is quite common factors which is directly or indirectly contribute to the house prices. To say that house prices will remain the same in the coming years, I would have some reservation on that, because if we compare from the year, if I'm not mistaken, from the it's about, if we look at the housing pricing index, it's about 150 go above or increase from the percentages as indicated by the NAPIC or the Tusaraya and the KRI. Yeah? The land cost, I think I do not have to elaborate more on the land cost, because we understood that the land cost related directly to the house prices. If we have a land in the capital city, of course the price will be higher. But if we have the land provided at the outskirts or even in the suburban, probably the price will be a bit higher. And the labor cost, it is as determined by the government, or the minimum wages to the labor. That contribute directly to the house prices. Also the building material, because the building material, the control of the building materials, of course it is directly under the KP and KK, as I mentioned in the dialogue that we had before. But it's really an open market determined. If the demand is more, if the we say that if the housing projects really goes up, then the demand for the building materials also goes up. So the price, the same thing as the price. So the imbalance demand and supply, we are talking about demand and supply. It is a direct theory of economy, where the demand is more, then the price of the houses will also will increase as per demand. And the speculators, though under the regulation of 118, Akta Pemajuan Perumahan Kawalan Pelaksanaan, we have some regulation, or we have some clause saying that any purchase of houses more than 4 should be reported to us, but this will not deter the speculators from making profit out of it. So the speculator itself, indirectly or indirectly, have some contribution factors in the house prices. They bought the house now before the housing project completed, and then they sell it before it completed. So it's really hard to really control the speculators. And so this is the initiative undertaken by the KPKT or Jabatan Perumahan. So we said that the government has set up a policy where the government has said in the year 2013 that by the end of 2018, the government would like to provide about 1 million affordable house. What is the affordable house? Based on the decision made by the Majlis Perumahan Negara or National Housing Policy, we have said that the price for the affordable house is about 300,000 and below. So it is now, as we can see now, it's already it's only about 21% completed. And when we took at overall the under progress and also planning, we have achieved about 80% something. So it is achievable, but probably will not achieve by the end of 2018, probably after 2018. But still, we are quite optimistic that the numbers will be achieved probably by the year 2020 or above. And then we look at the initiative taken to curb speculators. So the Bank Negara, with the help of Bank Negara, we have set out some policy. The Bank Negara has set up the RPGT or Cukai Keuntungan Harta Tanah, whereas the selling or the stamp duty will be increased for the price of the houses, more than 1 million, and the price and perks for purchasers, prohibition of developer. DIBS is also one of the policies set by the Bank Negara. Loan to value by Bank Negara also, where you're buying a house or property, a house, if I'm not mistaken, you're buying a third and a fourth house and so on, the banks will be only allowed to give loan up to 70%, if I'm not mistaken. And this initiative under KPKT, we have a few program or initiative offered by the ministry. For example, as mentioned by Mr. Sheikh in his speech this morning, My Home, the incentive of 30,000 unit for the developers. Yeah? So any house below 200,000 and below is also entitled for incentive under My Home, where the government giving out 30,000 each for each house built by the developers. And under my deposit initiative, the government actually offer for the house buyer, for the first time house buyer who's buying house, except that My Home set a limit of 200,000 and below, but my deposit set a limit of 500,000 and below. So the government giving out 30,000 per unit or 10%, whichever the lower, if the house price is 500,000, then you are entitled for 30,000 subsidy by the government. But you are buying a house of the price of 200,000, then you are entitled for subsidy of 20,000, which is 10%. And the SPP scheme pinjaman perumahan, this is for the lower income group. Last month, the government agreed to increase the premium from 45,000 to 60,000. The interest need to pay by the applicants only about 2% per year. And we have quite a very interesting a long period of payment, is about 30 to 35 years. It depends on the age of the applicant. And also we see the initiative under other ministries other than KPKT, Cagamas, for example, offering a scheme Rumah Pertamaku, BSN, scheme Perumahan Belia, dan under LPSA also ada scheme pinjaman perumahan awam. So we have a lot of initiative offered by the government. Yeah, and also I have actually, I'm not sure, it's not in the slide. Actually, a number of abandoned projects as recorded by us. As per last year, actually we have about 226 abandoned projects, which is involved around, if I'm not mistaken, 60,000 more unit of houses, which involve buyers of more than 40,000. So of this number, of this 226 project, the government, we only tackle project which is fall under sederhana rendah or cost rendah. We don't cater for the house, the high end. It's more than 300,000. So it's now 185,000. 185 projects already completed by us, by Kementerian Perumahan, which is about around 30,000 unit for houses. But I don't have the number of exact number of house involved. But this 185 project is already completed. 19 projects is under construction and 20 projects under the planning stage. So all in, the government under KPKT, we are quite serious about helping people or our citizens in buying an affordable house. So, but the KPKT alone cannot solve all the problem, and we do need help from all of you, particularly the developers, to offer more affordable houses so that we can help more people in this area. So, thank you.
Assalamualaikum, good morning. Thank you, Abhas, for inviting me to speak at this very, very important conference, and happy birthday to Abhas. I was once on the board of Abhas some years ago, and it's nice to see my fellow board members here, and sorry, my former fellow board members here, and all these very distinguished guests. I'm going to speak a few words about the work which Khazanah Research Institute has been doing on affordable housing, which I hope will kind of inform the debate, and I really look forward to the discussion after this. Are my slides? Can I have my slides up? There we are. So Making Housing Affordable was the title of a book which Khazanah Research Institute released about 2 years ago. And it caused a bit of a stir in the press because I think it was the first time the facts have been laid out on the table. And I think one thing we find out about debate in Malaysia is that people debate without the facts, which is a really, really sad thing to do because you get all excited and then find out that you're getting excited about the wrong thing. So the first thing we wanted to do really was to set out the facts and find out what is the extent of is there a problem in the first place, and second place, where is the problem, and third place, what can be done about the problem. Yeah, okay. So, affordable housing is, as the World Bank said earlier, is not something, problem unique to Malaysia. And the UN says it's one of the SDG goals, and it's all very important to look at. Now, we don't need the UN to tell us what's important, but it's nice to know that the UN also recognize, what we recognize, which is that, housing is a very important thing. So, let's go straight to the heart of the matter, which is there a housing problem in Malaysia? And as the Deputy Governor, Saudara Sheikh Rashid, said earlier this morning, how do you define unaffordable? And a generally accepted definition of it is a market is considered affordable if the median house price in that market is 3 times the annual median household income of that market. So we're not saying that all houses have to be 3 times the median household price, but the median house price has to be 3 times the median household income. And that's a measure of the market as a whole. So obviously you can have expensive houses, but you also need cheap houses as well. And you can have middle income houses, middle price houses, because the rich people and people with less money. So that's the kind of general definition. So if you use that general definition and you map Malaysian house prices against Malaysian median incomes, and you go by state, you find that some markets are severely unaffordable. So Kuala Lumpur and Penang, over 5 times, right? Johor, moderately, about 4 times. Selangor and Negeri Sembilan, between 3 to 4 times, which is considered moderately unaffordable. and Malacca, affordable at 3 times. So this is not a national problem. It's a problem really at the big cities, which are wealthy areas. So it's a rich man's problem, right? There are many states who don't appear here: Kelantan, Terengganu, Perak, Perlis, Kedah, Sabah, Sarawak. And the reason is that most of the housing there is actually informal housing. So this is official data from NAPIC, right, which tracks land registry prices and stamp duty and things like that. The kind of housing market which all of us are familiar with because we lend, or I shouldn't say we, but bankers are familiar with, because when bankers lend money, you lend money against property which is properly registered in the title deed. But if you live in Sabah, Sarawak, Terengganu, Kedah, Kelantan, most of the property is kampung land. You don't go through the formal system. So that whole informal housing market isn't captured by these data. So if you go to Terengganu or Kelantan, or you go to Perak outside Ipoh, and you ask people, is house prices your #1 problem? It isn't. Many other things are a problem to them. For example, cost of schooling or the cost of food. But housing is not the #1 problem. But it is a problem for the rich. So, one can get really overexcited because we're all rich in the Klang. We all live in the Klang Valley. We talk to people who live in the Klang Valley, and we're obsessed in the Klang Valley about property prices. But is that the most important problem for Malaysia? It's the most important problem for Klang Valley, perhaps, but is it the most important problem for Malaysia? And so, sometimes we have to think about these things very hard, because when we want to prioritize what should be done, let's prioritize the right things. So, but it is true that housing has gotten worse in terms of what is perceived by the general public. This is a measure of down market penetration. In other words, the measure goes something like, let's look at the cheapest house, or rather the 20% cheapest house, find the median price, and see how many times that is against the median income. In other words, are there enough cheap houses coming into the market for people who have median income or lower? And it's gotten worse over time. KL is like 2.3 times, whereas Malacca is less than 1 time. So Malacca is not bad. The cheapest house is less than 1 year's income, which is not a bad thing. But then if you look at Kuala Lumpur, it's getting worse. And you can see on the left is the number of houses used to be launched. And basically the message is that as time goes on, more and more $400,000 houses, $1 million houses are being launched, and less lower house prices are being launched. So there is a problem, but again, it's in the bigger cities. Now, and we've talked a lot about affordable housing schemes. So let's look at this. Puts on the right a kind of not exhaustive list of the public of the housing schemes to make housing affordable. Now, on the left is the green bars shows you the kind of prices which they're looking at. So you're going up. We're having government assistance for houses which cost almost 400,000 ringgit. That's Prima and RMM Pulau Pinang, and at the bottom, Kelantan, Sarawak are looking at houses costing about 100,000 ringgit. So that's the house prices. Then you look at the right, and the kind of income range. So Pulau Pinang and stuff are helping people who earn up to 10,000 ringgit a month. And if you look at Rumah Mampu Milik Wilayah Persekutuan, we're helping people who are single, who have incomes of up to 10,000 ringgit a month, and you're having people who are married of 15,000 ringgit a month. Now, if you live in Kuala Lumpur, maybe people in KL earn more than people in Terengganu. So maybe you have to have a higher threshold. But is it right that money is given to people who earn 10,000 ringgit a month when there are people in Sabah and Sarawak who maybe could have better use of that money? I mean, are we getting our priorities right? I mean, it is a big issue, but how are we prioritizing things the right way? And are we helping the right kind of people? Because there's a B40, M40, T20 look. So, we're having schemes which are actually going to the T20 class. Is that, again, the right use of resources? So, and the other thing to think about is, for example, take My Home, where it's 30,000 ringgit to a low-cost buyer. Are we helping buyers, or are we subsidizing developers? Because the money goes straight to the developer. So if you're a developer, why bring down the price of houses if the government's going to give you $30,000? Right? So again, we have to think about this, and think about, again, are we we talked, as mentioned just now about rental. I mean, should we be helping people to buy houses, or should we be helping people to rent houses? So, one of the more successful rental housing schemes we have is Project Perumahan Rakyat. This is a national scheme where the federal government builds high-rise apartments. So it's, if you just look at the bottom column, it's 124 ringgit a month. So basically, you can rent an apartment in KL for 124 ringgit a month. KRI is doing a big study on PPR. We're going to visit all the PPRs and asking every person in every apartment what they think about PPR and what can be done. And you find in some PPRs, you have 3 generations of people living. This is about 600, 700 square foot apartment in Jinjiang. So 3 generations, grandparents, kids, grandkids, all living in one apartment. And if you think about it, that's the only way you can survive in KL, right? I mean, if you earn, I don't know, 1,000 a month, 2,000 a month, how are you going to survive in KL unless you have 124 ringgit a month apartment? But should we be expecting those people who earn that money to be able to ever buy a house? And should we be spending money and resources to help them buy houses? Isn't it better to just build more PPRs and have the state give them affordable renting? And this happens in many countries in the world. I mean, it happens in the UK, for example, or any other countries where you have this idea that there are some people who can afford a house, you try and fix it so that they can buy a house. Some people whose incomes are just not high enough to ever be able to buy a house. Just make sure that they have somewhere decent to stay at a rental price, at a rental they can afford. And although it's a PPR, and although it's in Jinjiang, it takes about 15 minutes to drive to Chao Kek Market from there, maybe 12 minutes. It's not far, right? Now, if you think about it, the market price of somewhere 15 minutes away from Chao Kek is probably, I don't know, $500 a square foot, $600 a square foot, whatever it is, right? But we're giving these people somewhere to rent, somewhere it's really expensive to rent 124 ringgit. And to me, that's right. I mean, why should only rich people have the ability to live near the city center? We need all kinds of people to live near the city center. And, so in the PPR scheme and the other schemes we've talked about are where the government provides the housing, right? So PPR, the government actually builds the building and rents it out. For the other schemes, the government gives the developer a subsidy to bring the house down. But in Philippines, you actually have a totally market-driven solution where you can do it for cheap. So there's a company called 8990 Holdings, which IPO'd a couple of years ago, and Khazanah was one of the investors. And one of the reasons Khazanah went in, this was before I joined Khazanah, was that it provided affordable housing. So, that development there, they can provide a 2-bedroom house for 57,000 ringgit Malaysian currency, right? It's a beautiful development. You got a swimming pool. It's got roads. It's accessible to the town center, and the reason why they can do it so cheap is that they can build a townhouse within 10 days. So what you do is you bring the cost down and you build it really fast and really quickly, and you sell it really cheap. And so the people who buy the houses are people like nurses, taxi drivers, people who can't qualify for a bank loan normally in Philippines. But the developer gives them some easy financing and manage to do it. So you have a market-based solution. So affordable homes, or letting people buy somewhere affordable, doesn't necessarily require government intervention. It can be done by the private sector. This is a profit-making entity, and they make very, very good returns. The share price has gone up tremendously. And the people who ran this grew up in this kind of houses. So it wasn't a rich developer somewhere trying to do it. But these are people who grew up in some of the places we saw, the pictures we saw just now of Manila, in places like that. And they came up with this business of developing. The person who runs it is a man called Jesus, or Jesus, which is a very fitting name for the CEO of an affordable housing company. So anyway, I'll cut to the chase. So in our book, we recommended 3 things. One is improve the delivery system. So in other words, make houses more efficient. We haven't moved very much. The way we build a house today and the way houses were built in the 1960s hasn't changed very much. You have people mixing cement and putting bricks and concrete and stuff like that, right? Technology has moved on. As 8990 shows us, you can do industrial built systems or build it in a factory way and assemble the houses on site and do it very quickly and do it very cheaply. The second thing is that when government, there may be ways of doing moratoriums on certain cheap houses so that prices will not escalate. And thirdly, which again was talked about by the Deputy Governor just now, this idea about having data information so that we can plan properly. It's remarkable that we have data on how many new developments are coming up because developers have to apply. We have some data on population growth. We have some data on income, but we never marry all that together. So we never actually plan, how many houses are needed by where. When we say let's build 1 million houses, where should we build those 1 million houses? What's the right place and what's the right quantity? We don't have that kind of data, so we need that kind of planning. So this is just some way to think about housing policy. On the one hand, looking at the blue squares, right? Shelter. We have to provide shelter. We can't have people, having nowhere to live. And to that extent, we've done it. But we haven't really done it. Go to Kelantan, the people who lost their homes after the last flood, many of them still don't have anywhere to live. So while in KL, we don't have people living on the streets, we can't say the whole of Malaysia has actually fulfilled this one basic obligation to its people. And then there's this idea of habitat as well. So it's not something, housing policy isn't just providing about shelter, it's also about habitat, making sure that if you build houses, they're near schools, the communities, what we talked about earlier. And of course, part of housing policy is also social engineering, right? Singapore, for example, HDB flats, they make sure that, X% Malay, X% Chinese, X% Indian, to make sure that it preserves some kind of diversity. I don't know whether it's good or bad, but there's a lot of social engineering, making sure poor people live next to rich people, middle income people next to lower income people. And the other thing is asset. We get mixed up about housing as an asset and housing as a social need, right? For those of us who can afford houses and we want house prices to go up, and it's actually in our interest. The last thing we want is for houses to become cheap, really. Because that wipes out the savings of many, many people. But don't mix those two things up, right? If you're looking at financial assets, is housing the best way to save for it? We've done some studies, and they're done in many cases. Is it better to rent a house, or is it better to buy a house? And in terms of your financial future. And it really boils down to rates of return. Is house price appreciation high compared to, say, putting it in a unit trust? Is interest rates high compared to rental rates, and what's the growth in both? So if you think about it, people say don't rent because you're just throwing money away, you're paying money to the landlord. But if you buy a house and you take a loan, you're renting money from the bank. So you're equally throwing money away by paying interest. So the question is, which is it better? Now for sure, if you happen to buy Taman Tun, you're probably better off buying a house than buying unit trust. But that's great if you can afford Taman Tun. If you can't afford Taman Tun, then you have to buy, for most people, probably rather than spending 2,000 ringgit a month to pay the bank for the installment, pay 300 ringgit a month, or 500 ringgit a month, or 600 ringgit a month to rent the house, and put the other 1,400 into unit trust. You may actually find out that it works out better that way. I mean, in the old days, there was no unit trust industry. Now, it's a hugely developed unit trust industry. You can do that. So there are many ways of thinking about it. And the delivery system as well, this build then sell then build, build then sell, and then, sell then build. I'm into the build and sell, but some people. And then, of course, the private and public sector, is it the government's problem? Totally. Shouldn't the private sector have to do? Aren't there any market solutions? Instead of subsidizing houses, should we just give people money and let them decide? You want to use the money to buy a house? You want to use the money to rent a house? You want to use the money to educate your kids? Why are we saying that 30,000 ringgit per family is what we're giving in some cases? Is it really the best thing in the world for that family and the best use of money to give 30,000 ringgit to buy a house? Why not tell them you can use the 30,000 ringgit to educate your kids? Probably think that's a better idea. Anyway, I think I've gone over my speech, so thank you very much, and I'll talk to you later. Thank you.
Selamat sejahtera dan selamat pagi. Yang berusaha Tuan Sheikh Abdul Rashid, Deputy Governor of Bank Negara Malaysia. Yang berusaha Tuan Nick Muhammad Hasdin, Chairman of Chagamas Holdings Berhad, distinguished guest, fellow panelists, learned audience, the academician, ladies and gentlemen. Saya ingin mengambil kesempatan ini untuk mengucap Selamat Hari Raya Aidilfitri kepada semua yang menyambut Hari Raya. Now, thank you for inviting HBA to be here. It's indeed an honor to speak in this dialogue. The National House Buyers Association, in short, HBA, is a voluntary, non-profit, non-political organization manned by volunteer members of various professions. We operate purely on volunteer workers' benevolence. Our volunteers work hard to pool their knowledge and resources together to strive for the rights and interests of other house buyers. After all, we are all house buyers. The aim is to balance up the disadvantaged position of house buyers in the housing supply-dominated market and not continue to hold to the short end of the stick. We strive for balanced, fair, and equitable treatment for house buyers in the dealing with housing developers. The main purpose then, as today, is to create awareness of legal rights and to voice house buyers' interests and concern in the housing arena. For more information and objective of HBA, you're welcome to visit our website at www.hba.org.my. Now, in this August assembly of people who are experts in their own field or profession, HBA seeks your patience to expound our view on the state of affairs in the housing industry. For whatever is worth, they represent our views, which we believe is representative of the thousands of house buyers, past, present, and potential, who find buying and hunting for a house to call it their home a nightmarish hunt. And in the matter of public interest, we are here. Mr. Moderator, sir, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to report that our Deputy Governor, Tuan Sheikh Abdul Rashid, in his keynote address, has covered everything that I wanted to say. Hence, I would like to adopt it en bloc. Now, I wholeheartedly concur with our Deputy Governor for his holistic approach, his recommendation, and I have little to add only, but that will still take 17 minutes. Harga rumah melampau. Now, that's the desperate cry of rakyat against skyrocketing house prices, as we had voiced out some 6 years ago. In English, it means house prices are ridiculous. Now, the National House Buyers Association has constantly called for the government intervention to prevent a homeless generation of young adults, Malaysian, from emerging, especially in the urban and suburban areas, who, if not for the wild speculation, would have been able to buy their homes. In Malaysia, we will face a social crisis with serious political implication if the majority of the lower and middle income group do not have affordable houses. The matter is of grave urgency because the homeless hail from a lower middle class, first-time house buyers, usually graduates, couples, or the self-employed earning reasonable income and expecting to buy a house to commence their family life in a fixed abode. Mr. Moderator, sir, ladies and gentlemen, now it is important to differentiate affordable housing from social housing. Social housing are those low-cost to medium-cost housing such as PPR units, which are meant for low-income group, or they are those categorized under urban poverty group. Typical household income, in order to qualify for such social housing, is below 3,000 ringgit per month. Such social housing typically only has one room or two bedrooms and costs between 35,000 ringgit to 60,000 ringgit, with built up of about 650 square feet only. Now, affordable housing are classified as properties intended to cater for the median population, the middle income group, and are priced between 150,000 ringgit to 300,000 ringgit, up to 350,000 in prime areas, and with built up of at least 800 square feet, excluding the balcony, and with 3 bedrooms. The household income of this middle income group is between 3,000 to 10,000 ringgit per month. While the lower income group can help receive from the government in a form of social housing, the middle income are left to fend on their own. Yet many would say that the condition of social housing are less than ideal, but this argument is meant for another forum. Now, this dialogue is to talk about affordable housing for the masses, the median population, the middle income group, which form the backbone of our country. In order to achieve a high income nation, it is important that the government understand the aspiration and sufferings of this middle income group and to also provide assistance to this middle income group. As mentioned earlier, affordable housing are priced between 150,000 to 300,000 ringgit, and with a build-up of 800 square feet, excluding balcony, with a decent 3-bedroom. However, new properties launched by developers that falls within this range, this price range, are very rare. Even studio units with 1 bedroom and build up only 550 square feet, these shoebox units are sold in excess of 500,000 in Greater Klang Valley. Most new launches by developers are priced in excess of $500,000 and are beyond the reach of this group of middle income group. If the situation continues, we have got a problem of this homeless generation. Now, due to the rising cost of living, the middle income group also find it very challenging to even buy affordable category of housing, and also they too need assistance from the government. Typically, rent to own, RTO, should also be part of the social housing engineering program. This RTO scheme for affordable properties should greatly assist the middle income group, especially the sandwiched generation, house buyers with young children and elderly parents to provide for. Now, with the rising cost of living, this group of house buyers find it very challenging to even save 10% down payment and service monthly housing loan based on their current income. However, due to escalating house prices, their income can never catch up without the RTO scheme. They are forced to continue renting. There is a clear mismatch between house prices as against household income. This group is in dire need of a RTO scheme, as legally owning a home provides financial security in the golden years, so they do not need to continue renting when they are no longer economically active or able to work. What is required is a holistic, sustainable development of affordable housing, including RTO scheme, which requires the cooperation of all stakeholders. HBA proposed that the government set up an affordable housing task force, which includes federal government, federal ministry, Ministry of Urban Wellbeing, Housing and Local Government, Ministry of Works, Ministry of Finance, Bank Negara, Malaysia, equivalent state government economic agencies like PKNS, since land is under state jurisdiction, those giant GLCs company who are involved in property development like SB Setia, Glomac, MRCB, Simdabi, etc. EPF too must play a role here. Financial institutions such as Commercial Bank, Islamic Bank and DFIs, and all licensed lending institutions. Key players should also include the developers, vendors, architects, town planners. Now, this affordable housing task force should coordinate and act as a single umbrella with collection of data and having a database. Those housing units in the planning stage, in the construction stage, and those completed ones. They should also collate those overhang housing units that are already in the market. For affordable housing to be successful, it also must be sustainable and not just for show. They build for one project and one location. Hence, the key of our sustainable, affordable housing to be successful are as follows. A, to reduce the cost of such properties, but not the quality. 2, to reduce the cost of such properties, but not for the developer to up the margin profit. C, being able to build such property in the right number and in the right location. Like what I always say, they must build the right product at the right location with the right pricing and the right number. D, Being able to continue building such units over a medium to long term, say about next 10 years to 20 years, and finally, able to replicate this model throughout Malaysia and not just in the Klang Valley. The Affordable Housing Task Force, comprising of intelligent people, can also think of solution on how to implement this RTO scheme for the middle income segment to assist them to own their dream homes. HBA has suggestion in order to reduce the cost of such property without compromising on quality is 1, alienate lands at lower cost to developers to build affordable housing. The government can alienate lands to responsible housing developers at a lower price or charge lower conversion premium on the condition that the majority of the land, say about 70%, is used to build affordable housing. I will not use the word good developers because it's not in my vocabulary. It's responsible developers, serious big developers. They should come in as stakeholders in the market. Number 2, faster approval for developers to build affordable houses. The government can also offer a fast-track approval. Cut away all those cornering, all that. Cut away all those hidden costs. That's the purpose of Jabatan OSC, one-stop center. Cost to lay last mile of utility to be borne by utility companies. LLN was my grandfather's days. Now, LLN has now become corporatized and privatized. They are now called TNB. Why are they forcing developer to build those substations? Whatever the need to be built should be borne by those utility companies. Similarly, telephone, sewage, and water. The government has already privatized it. Accordingly, they should bear the cost of doing business. No more they should be asking house buyers or other developers to build all those infrastructures for them. Because ultimately, we know developers are not charitable organizations. They lumber the cost and factor the cost into the house buyers. We are all house buyers, like I always said. Next one is offer tax incentive for developers to build affordable housing. Now, private developers are profit maximizing entities and will build more affordable housing if there are profits to be made. Developers always claim that the profit is only 20% of selling price. Well, good. Hence, the higher the price, the higher the profit. We must come up with a tax incentive whereby developer would prefer to sell the properties at lower price if the net returns is almost the same as selling the prices at a higher price. So it would be easier to sell the said property at a lower price as the target market will be larger. The proposed Affordable Housing Task Force could ponder on the suggestion that we have made. Other additional methods of helping affordable housing is preferential interest rate for developers and borrowers. Key in proper selection monitoring is very important. Now, let's face it, RTO would not be a scheme that private developers will want to venture on their own without some sort of partnership with the government or tax incentive. They are there for the profit. We got to make it profitable for them to participate. In conclusion, HBA fully understand and appreciate the vital role played by the housing industry in the nation's social and economic development. It is precisely for this very reason that we have been critical of the witnesses that are prevalent in the market. We believe that sustainable growth for the industry can only flourish in an environment of orderliness and good governance. HBA urged all stakeholders to come together for the greater good of our country to think of solutions on how to create a sustainable, affordable housing industry where profits are not the ultimate objective and stimulant, but to put a roof over our rakyat's head. Thank you very much for your time and for listening to the house buyer side. Now, if the moderator permits, I would like to mimic the legendary Mahatma Gandhi. Okay? He said this, I always have got this behind my mind. I have to speak it up. Okay? He says, you have to do the right thing. It may not be in your power, may not be in your time, that there be any fruits. But that doesn't mean you stop doing the right thing. You may never know what results come from your action. But if you do nothing, there'll be no results. Pochi. Thank you.